I am Serena, 32, sitting in my car outside my parents' sprawling colonial-style home in Connecticut. I can see them all inside through the bay windows waiting for me with those tight expressions they wear when they disapprove of something, which is usually me. What they don't know is that the modest Honda I'm driving is just for show. What they don't know is that I own a multi-million-dollar business. What they don't know is that I saw right through the suspicious invitation to this family meeting. As I gather my courage to walk inside, there's a feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach. I never imagined my own family would stage an intervention to disown me for the good of the family. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever had family betray you. Subscribe now because you're not going to believe what happened next. Growing up in our upper-middle-class neighborhood in Connecticut, appearances were everything to my parents, Richard and Julia Parker. Our colonial-style home, with its perfectly manicured lawn and coordinated holiday decorations, was the physical manifestation of what they valued most, a flawless public image. I was the second child of 4 sandwiched between my older brother Thomas, who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, and my younger siblings Amanda and James. Thomas was the golden child destined to take over my father's real estate firm from birth. Amanda was the people pleaser, always adapting herself to whatever would make our parents happy. James the baby was the rebellious one who somehow got away with breaking all the rules that the rest of us were punished for breaking. And me, I was the forgotten middle child, the one who never quite fit the Parker family mold, the one whose accomplishments were acknowledged with faint praise if they were acknowledged at all. Our family dynamic was built on traditions that felt more like obligations. Every Sunday evening, without fail, we gathered for formal dinners, where we were expected to report our weekly achievements. Thomas always had the floor the longest, detailing his academic successes, sports victories, or later his business accomplishments. Amanda would share her social connections and volunteer work that enhanced the family reputation. James would grudgingly mention something that wouldn't upset our parents too much, and I would try to make my interests sound acceptable to a family that valued only certain types of success. My father built his real estate empire through connections, charm, and a ruthless business sense he kept hidden behind his community leader smile. From an early age, it was clear he expected all of us to join Parker Properties eventually. It was presented not as an option, but as our destiny, our birthright, our obligation. The first major crack in my relationship with my family appeared when I was 17. While browsing the school library, I discovered a book on web development. Something clicked inside me as I flipped through those pages of code. It was like finding a language I somehow already understood. I taught myself HTML and CSS, staying late after school to use the computer lab, since my parents thought computers were just expensive toys. When college application season arrived, Thomas had already graduated from Yale with honors. My parents had mapped out the same path for me, Ivy League business degree, return home to join the family firm. But I had different plans. When my acceptance letter to the state university with one of the best computer science programs in the country arrived, I was ecstatic. My parents were horrified. "You want to attend a public university?" My mother had said the word public as if it tasted bad in her mouth. The Parkers have attended Ivy League schools for generations. Dad was more direct. "No daughter of mine is wasting her time playing with computers when she could be getting connections that will last a lifetime. This discussion is over. We're sending the deposit to Yale tomorrow." That night I did something I'd never done before. I stood my ground. The argument lasted for hours, ending only when I revealed I'd already accepted the state university's offer and applied for financial aid behind their backs. The look on my father's face that night was one I'd never seen before, and would see many times after disappointment mixed with something that felt dangerously close to disgust. 4 years later, I graduated with honors in computer science. Thomas stood talking with my father about the family business during my entire graduation ceremony. My mother commented that it was a shame I hadn't found a suitable husband during college, since that was the real purpose of education for young women in our circle. Amanda looked at me with a mixture of awe and concern, while James secretly gave me a thumbs up when our parents weren't looking. Instead of coming home to join Parker Properties as they still expected, despite everything, I took a job at a struggling tech startup in Boston. The pay was terrible, but the opportunity to learn was priceless. The distance from my family grew in more ways than geographic. Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly visits, where I'd endure subtle digs about my appearance, my professional wardrobe never quite living up to my mother's standards, my supposedly misguided career choice, and my lack of a husband from a good family. "You know, Serena," my mother would say, passing me the potatoes I hadn't asked for Caroline Winthrop's daughter just married a surgeon. They met through family connections. If you'd let me introduce you to some suitable young men, or my father would casually mention, there's always a place for you at Parker Properties. Even in an administrative role, you'd make twice what you're making at that little computer company. With each visit, the gulf widened. They couldn't see me because they were too busy looking at the daughter they thought I should be. And as much as it hurt, I began to realize that maybe that was for the best. Because the real me, the one they refused to see, was building something they could never understand. I struggled during my first months at Tech Forward, the Boston startup that took a chance on a fresh graduate. The hours were long, the pay was minimal, and the pressure was intense. But I was learning more in weeks than I had in years of classes, and there was something exhilarating about being valued for my mind rather than my family name. My tiny studio apartment was a far cry from the luxury I'd grown up with. I slept on a futon, ate ramen more often than I'd like to admit, and washed my laundry in a building basement with machines that ate quarters and occasionally clothes. But it was mine earned through my own work, and that made it more valuable than the designer bedroom in my parents' house had ever been. 6 months into my job, I met Diane Chen, the company's technical director, and the person who would change my life. She was brilliant, no nonsense, and had zero tolerance for excuses, but she recognized something in me that even I hadn't fully seen yet. "You have good instincts, Serena," she told me after I stayed late to fix a coding error others had missed. "But good isn't enough in this industry. You need to be exceptional." Under Diane's mentorship, I pushed myself harder than ever before. While my colleagues headed home or to bars after work, I stayed behind, learning new programming languages, studying user experience design, and absorbing everything I could about what made tech businesses succeed or fail. One evening, Diane found me still at my desk at 10 p.m. "Building a shrine to your keyboard?" she asked, leaning against my cubicle wall. "I want to understand how the payment processing system works," I admitted. She studied me for a moment. "You know, most people just want to do their assigned tasks and go home. I'm not most people." "No," she said thoughtfully. "You're not." She pulled up a chair. "All right, let's talk about payment systems, e-commerce, and why most online businesses fail in the first year." That night was the beginning of what would become my own business. Diane didn't just teach me about coding, she taught me to think like an entrepreneur, to see gaps in the market, to understand what customers needed before they knew they needed it. 3 years ago, I launched SecureCart, an e-commerce platform that made online selling accessible to small businesses who couldn't afford complex systems. I started small, building websites for local businesses on evenings and weekends while still working my day job. My first client was a local bakery whose owner was tired of losing business to national chains with slick online ordering. When her sales increased 40% in the first month after launching her website, other local businesses took notice. Soon I had more side work than I could handle alone. I took a risk and hired Alex, a brilliant programmer I'd met at a tech conference who shared my vision. We worked from my apartment, at first taking turns at my small desk fueled by cheap coffee and expensive dreams. 6 months later, we had 10 clients. A year later, 50. 18 months in, I finally left my day job and rented a small office space. All this time, my family remained completely unaware of my growing success. At holiday gatherings, I continued to let them believe I was still struggling at an entry-level tech position. When my mother made comments about my practical but inexpensive clothes, I didn't mention that I was deliberately dressing down. When my father offered to help me with rent, I politely declined without explaining that I was now making more in a month than he thought I made in a year. Why keep my success a secret? At first, it was because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it without their connections or approval. Later, it was because I recognized a painful truth. My achievements in a field they didn't value or understand would never be good enough. And finally, I realized that once they knew about my success, they would either try to take credit for it or advantage of it. So I lived modestly despite my growing bank account. I drove a reliable Honda rather than the luxury car I could afford. I wore mid-range brands rather than designer labels. I stayed in my now comfortable but not lavish apartment rather than buying the penthouse I sometimes browsed online. The only people who knew the truth were Alex, who had become both business partner and close friend, and Diane, who had left Tech Forward to join our growing company as Chief Technology Officer. Last month, everything changed. A major tech conglomerate approached us with an acquisition offer of $4.2 million. They wanted our technology, our client base, and our team. It was the validation of everything we'd built, a life-changing sum of money, and an opportunity to scale our solutions beyond what we could do alone. The night after the initial offer, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the subtle signs of my success, that my family had never noticed: the high-end laptop, the original artwork on my walls, the expensive coffee maker that had replaced my cheap drip model years ago. For the first time, I seriously considered whether it was time to finally tell my family the truth. Would they finally be proud? Would they acknowledge that my path had been the right one for me? Or would they find some way to diminish what I'd built? Would my father suddenly remember that he'd always supported my interest in technology? Would my brother try to position himself as an advisor to my company? I thought about the new building we were in the process of buying for our expanding company headquarters. I thought about the team of 22 people now depending on me for their livelihoods. I thought about the acquisition papers, waiting for my signature papers, that would transform me from successful entrepreneur to wealthy investor overnight. As I poured myself a glass of the expensive scotch I kept for special occasions, my phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "You still overthinking this," it read, followed by a reminder: "You built this, not them. Whatever you decide about telling your family, don't let them rewrite your story." I smiled, grateful, not for the first time, that I'd found people who saw and appreciated the real me. The next morning, I put the acquisition papers in my desk drawer, deciding to take a few more days to consider all my options before signing. Little did I know that events were already in motion that would force my hand in ways I never expected. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the middle of a meeting with our development team. My mother's name flashing on my phone screen was unusual enough that I excused myself to answer it. "Serena," she said, her voice carrying that familiar blend of authority and distance. "We need you to come to the house this Saturday at 4 p.m. It's important." "What kind of important?" I asked, immediately suspicious. In my family, important usually meant something beneficial to them, not me. A pause. "It's a family matter that needs to be discussed in person. Everyone will be there." "Mum, I can't just drop everything without knowing what this is about." Her voice stiffened. "This is about family obligations, Serena. I would think even you would understand the importance of that. Even you." Two small words that carried the weight of a lifetime of disapproval. "I can be there at 4:30, I conceded, already regretting it. "But I have plans Saturday evening that I can't change." "That should be sufficient," she replied, and hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in the hallway staring at my phone, that familiar knot forming in my stomach, a sensation I'd come to associate exclusively with family interactions. My mother's tone, the formal request, the vague explanation, it all felt ominous. When I returned to the conference room, Alex took one look at my face and knew. "Family?" she asked after the meeting. I nodded. "Some kind of emergency family meeting on Saturday. Want me to call with a fake work crisis halfway through?" I smiled weakly. "Maybe keep your phone handy." "What do you think it's about?" I shook my head. "Nothing good." My mother's voice had that tone she gets when she's been talking to my father about me. "Like I'm a problem that needs solving." Alex frowned. "You know you could always tell them about the company before the meeting? Take control of the narrative." It was something I had considered many times but always rejected. No, they'd just find a way to make it about them, or say I should have told them sooner, or claim they always knew I'd succeed using the education they provided. Besides, Alex continued when I didn't respond, "You don't owe them your success story. They weren't part of it." I nodded, but a thought was forming. Maybe it was finally time to stop hiding, not for their sake, but for mine. That night I received a strange text from my sister Amanda. She rarely reached out directly, usually communicating through our mother. "Just checking you're coming Saturday," she wrote. "I am. Do you know what it's about?" A long pause before her reply. "You should prepare yourself." "For what?" 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her final message. "Just be ready. Love you." That was concerning. Amanda never went against our parents, and she certainly never warned me about their plans. If she was worried enough to reach out, something serious was brewing. I thought back to previous family meetings, none of which had ended well for me. When I was 16, a family meeting had been called to discuss my friendship with a girl my parents deemed unsuitable from the wrong side of town. When I was 20, a family meeting announced that they'd applied to Yale Law on my behalf, despite my explicit statement that I wanted to study computer science. Each gathering had been an ambush disguised as concern. By Friday, my anxiety had reached a peak. I confided my worries to Diane over lunch. "You know," she said carefully, "at some point, you have to decide whether maintaining these relationships is worth the emotional toll they're taking." They're my family, I replied automatically. She raised an eyebrow. Are they, or are they people who happen to share your DNA, but don't share your values, don't support your choices, and don't seem to particularly like the person you actually are? I had no answer for that. Saturday arrived all too quickly. I drove to my parents' house in Greenwich, the affluent Connecticut suburb, where I grew up, rehearsing various scenarios in my head. As I turned onto the familiar oak-lined street, I noticed all the family cars were already there. Thomas' sleek, Audi Amanda's, practical Volvo, even James' rarely seen vintage Jeep. Whatever was happening, everyone had been summoned. I parked on the street rather than the driveway, a small act of defiance and a practical escape route. For 10 minutes, I sat there staring at the house that had never truly felt like home, considering the option of simply driving away. Then my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We see you outside. Please come in. No escape then." As I walked up the immaculate stone path to the front door, I passed Mrs. Winters, our longtime neighbour, walking her dog. She gave me a strange look somewhere between pity and curiosity, like she knew something I didn't. Taking a deep breath, I opened the front door that had never been locked during daylight hours in all my memory. The house was unnaturally quiet. No classical music playing in the background as was my mother's custom. No sounds of cooking or conversation. Just silence, heavy and foreboding. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and walked toward whatever awaited me in the living room. The scene in the living room stopped me cold. My family wasn't just gathered, they were arranged like actors on a stage, waiting for the final character to appear before the play could begin. My father stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel in what I recognized as his power pose. My mother sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, a tissue clutched in her perfectly manicured hands. Thomas occupied the leather armchair that had always been designated as the most important seat in the room after my father's. Amanda perched on the window seat, eyes downcast. James leaned against the wall, arms crossed, looking uncomfortable. But what truly sent a chill through me was the presence of Dr. Peterson, our family's therapist, a man I hadn't seen since I refused further family counselling sessions at 17. He sat in a chair brought in from the dining room, a notebook open on his lap, watching me with clinical interest. "Serena," my father said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used in business negotiations. "Thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." The only available seat was a straight-backed chair positioned in the center of the room facing everyone else. I suddenly felt like a defendant in a courtroom. "What's going on?" I asked, remaining standing. My father exchanged a glance with Dr. Peterson, who nodded slightly. "Serena," my father began adopting what I thought of as his chairman of the board voice. "This is an intervention." I blinked. "An intervention? I don't have a substance abuse problem if that's what you're implying." "Not that kind of intervention," Thomas interjected, his tone condescending. "This is an intervention for the good of the family." My mother dabbed at her eyes with the tissue, though I noticed no actual tears. "We've been worried about you for so long, Serena." Dr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should proceed as discussed. Richard, you have the list." My father nodded and pulled a folded paper from his pocket. The Parkers had always been fond of lists and documentation. "Serena," he began, "we are here today because your choices and behavior have become increasingly detrimental to this family. I'm going to outline our concerns." I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching this scene in a movie rather than living it. "1. You have consistently refused to join the family business, despite numerous opportunities and your obligation as a Parker. 2. You have missed multiple important family events, including Thomas Award ceremony at the Chamber of Commerce and your mother's charity gala. 3. You have rejected every suitable man we've introduced you to, choosing instead to remain single at 32, creating speculation among our social circle. 4. You embarrassed the family at the country club fundraiser by arguing with Senator Baldwin's son about technology regulations. 5. We have reason to believe you are financially irresponsible, living beyond your means and possibly in debt, which could affect the family reputation. And 6. Most seriously, you have consistently failed to live up to the Parker name and the expectations that come with it. I stood frozen, each accusation landing like a physical blow. The sheer audacity of it, the careful preparation, the formal presentation of my supposed failings, as if they were criminal charges, it was breathtaking in its cruelty. Thomas stood and moved beside my father, a united front of disapproval. "Little sister," he said, in that falsely concerned voice I despised, "we've watched you struggle for years. Your stubborn insistence on this tech career has led you nowhere. You're barely making ends meet in a field with no future for someone without the right background. Amanda spoke next, her voice trembling. I'm worried about you, Serena. You always seem so alone. No husband, no children, no real security. It isn't natural. James opened his mouth as if to speak, but my father shot him a warning look, and he closed it again, his eyes communicating an apology I couldn't fully interpret. My mother rose, approaching me with hands outstretched. Darling, we only want what's best for you. You've been so lost for so long. It's time to come home, take your place in the family, let us help you find the right path. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. A strange calm was replacing my initial shock. Help me. This isn't help. This is control. Dr. Peterson stood holding a document. Serena, the family, has asked me to prepare what we call a family separation contract. It outlines 2 paths forward. My heart pounded painfully in my chest as he continued. Option 1 is reconciliation. You agree to join Parker Properties in an appropriate role, move back to Connecticut, allow your parents to introduce you to suitable partners, and participate fully in family and social obligations. Option 2 is separation. The family will regrettably need to distance themselves from you to protect the Parker name and legacy. I stared at him in disbelief. You're a therapist. How can you be part of this emotional blackmail? He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Family systems sometimes require difficult restructuring for the health of the whole. My father stepped forward. If you choose option 2, you should know we've already taken steps. You've been removed from the family trust. Your trust fund has been frozen pending your decision. That was when I realized they had planned this for weeks, perhaps months. The cold, calculated nature of it was staggering. Your mother's health has suffered from worrying about you, my father continued. Thomas' business connections have been questioned because of your unusual choices. Even Amanda and James have felt the effects of your selfishness. My mother delivered the final blow, her voice breaking, with what I now recognized as performative emotion. Serena, if you can't commit to this family properly, then I fear you'll no longer be welcome in this home. I looked around the room at these people who shared my blood, but who had never truly seen me, who had gathered today not to help me but to force me into submission, who had prepared legal documents to formalize my compliance or exile. The pain was acute but clarifying. In that moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do. For several long moments, I said nothing. The weight of their judgment, the carefully orchestrated ambush, the sheer audacity of their demands, all of it washed over me like a cold wave. But instead of drowning me, it awakened something. A clarity I'd been missing. A certainty about who I was and what I deserved. I need my laptop, I said, finally my voice steadier than I expected. My father frowned. This isn't the time for distractions, Serena. We're discussing your future? Yes, we are, I replied. May I get my laptop from my car, or would you prefer I use my phone? Thomas scoffed. Social media won't help you here, sis. I looked directly at him, really seeing the smug superiority that had always been there, but that I'd chosen to downplay in my mind. Is that what you think I do all day? Post on social media? Dr. Peterson intervened. Perhaps Serena feels she needs some resource to process this conversation. If it's helpful to her, I don't see the harm. My father nodded curtly. Make it quick. I walked outside to my car, taking deep breaths of the cool afternoon air. For a brief moment, I again considered simply driving away. But no, it was time to stop running, time to stop hiding. I grabbed my laptop and walked back into the house with purpose. When I returned to the living room, they were huddled together, whispering urgently. They separated as I entered like children caught plotting. I sat in the center chair they'd so carefully positioned for me and opened my laptop. For the first time that day, I felt in control. Before I respond to your intervention, I have something to show you, I said, bringing up the SecureCart website on my screen. I turned the laptop toward them. This is my company. I founded it 3 years ago. Blank stares greeted me. Your company, my mother repeated, as if the words made no sense together. My technology company, the one you all dismissed as a hobby, the one Dad called a waste of time, the one Thomas said had no future. I turned to face each of them. We currently have over 1,000 clients. We employ 22 people. And last month I scrolled to my email and pulled up the acquisition offer. Turning the screen back to them, we received this. My father adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, his expression shifting as he read the figure. His face, always so controlled, betrayed him with widened eyes and parted lips. $4.2 million, I said evenly. That's the acquisition offer for my worthless little tech hobby. You're making this up, Thomas said immediately, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I pulled up my banking app and logged in, showing them my business accounts. I could have shown them the numerous industry awards we'd won, the press coverage. We'd received the client testimonials we'd gathered. But I knew my family. Only money would truly get their attention, as the reality of what they were seeing sank in the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. My mother's tissue crumpling stopped. My father's posture changed his chairman of the board stance, giving way to something more calculating. Dr. Peterson looked genuinely surprised, glancing down at his notes, as if checking whether he'd missed something critical. Amanda was the first to speak, and to my surprise, her reaction seemed genuine. "Serena, that's amazing. Why didn't you tell us?" Before I could answer, my mother swooped in, her earlier distress magically vanished. "Darling, of course, we always knew you were brilliant with computers. I remember telling your father when you were just a girl that you had a special gift." I stared at her, incredulous at the brazen rewriting of history. Thomas, never one to stay silent, when attention had shifted away from him, jumped in. "Well, this changes things. You should have come to me for business advice, Serena. With my experience at Parker Properties, I could have helped you scale much faster." My father, ever the businessman, was already shifting strategies. "Serena," he said, his voice now warm with approval that felt like acid on my skin, "what you've accomplished is remarkable. Truly, and it demonstrates exactly why your talents would be so valuable to our family enterprise. Perhaps we could discuss a merger of sorts. Parker Properties has been looking to expand into the digital realm." I closed my laptop with a definitive click. "Let me make sure I understand. 15 minutes ago, I was a disappointment, a failure, someone who needed to be cut off from the family for the greater good. And now that you know I'm successful, now that you know there's money involved suddenly, I'm valuable again. You misunderstand," my mother said quickly. "We were never concerned about your success, only your happiness." Dr. Peterson, apparently sensing an opportunity to salvage the situation, chimed in. "This new information certainly changes the context of our discussion today. Perhaps what the family was interpreting as struggle was actually just your focus on building something significant." I turned to him. "Were you aware of my actual financial situation when you helped them draft a document to essentially blackmail me?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "I was working with the information provided to me." I stood up, a strange calm settling over me. "For years, I've hidden my success from you all because I knew deep down exactly how you'd react. I knew you'd either dismiss it as unimportant or try to claim it as somehow your achievement. And look," he motioned around the room, "I was right." Thomas started to object, but I held up my hand. "No, I'm speaking now. I've listened to all of you. For years, I've listened. Now it's your turn." I faced my father directly. "Dad, you never once asked me what I wanted, what made me happy, what I was good at. You had a path laid out, and when I chose differently, you saw it as rejection rather than growth. You measured my worth by how well I fit into your plans, not by who I actually am. To my mother, Mum, you taught me that appearance matters more than authenticity, that being accepted is more important than being true to yourself. You showed me that conditional love isn't love at all." To Thomas, "You never saw me as a sister, only as competition or as a disappointment. Either way, I was never a person to you, just a reflection that either enhanced or detracted from your own image." To Amanda, "You showed me what happens when you surrender your identity for approval. I love you, but I've never wanted to be you." To James, who had remained silent through everything, "You were the only one who ever seemed to see me. Thank you for that." Finally, I addressed Dr. Peterson, "And you enabled all of it, giving professional credibility to emotional manipulation. I hope your ethics board would be proud." I picked up the family separation contract from where it lay on the coffee table. "For the record, I choose option 2. I separate myself from this family, not because I've failed, but because I've succeeded beyond anything you could imagine, and you still can't see me." My father, never one to concede power, easily made a final attempt. "Serena, don't be hasty. Family connections could be very valuable in your industry. I know several potential investors who I want need investors, Dad. I already have an offer. And as for connections, I made those myself. In fact, I walked over to my bag and pulled out a business magazine I'd brought on impulse, the one that had featured our company last month. There's something you should know. Last year, at the Technology Summit in New York, I met Senator Baldwin's daughter. She's become one of our biggest advocates and introduced us to the acquisition team. I placed the magazine on the table open to the page, featuring a photo of me with my team, my success story laid bare. "I'm not the failure in this room," I said quietly. "I built something meaningful while you were all planning how to control me. I created a workplace where people are valued for their contributions, not their pedigree. I made a family of choice while you were drafting documents to disown me. I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. I left a copy of the acquisition paperwork on the hall table. Consider it proof that the path you didn't choose for me was the right one all along. As I walked out, I heard my mother call my name, her voice suddenly desperate. I heard my father saying something about family legacy. I heard Thomas beginning what sounded like an angry tirade. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't listening to them anymore. I was listening to myself. The moment I closed the door of my parents' house behind me, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to fade. I made it to my car, slid behind the wheel, and sat there, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The emotional impact of what had just happened hit me all at once like a physical blow. I managed to drive a few blocks before I had to pull over, tears blurring my vision too much to continue safely. In a quiet side street beneath the canopy of maple trees just beginning to show their full colors, I finally let go. Great heaving sobs wrenched from somewhere deep inside me, years of hurt and disappointment and longing for acceptance pouring out all at once. I'd known on some level that my family didn't truly accept me, but to have it laid out so explicitly, to see the clinical precision with which they'd planned to either force my compliance or cut me off, it was a different kind of pain altogether. The knowledge that the people who should love you most in the world could treat you as disposable was devastating in a way I hadn't been prepared for. And yet beneath the pain there was something else unfurling, a sense of freedom, of weights being lifted, of chains breaking. For the first time in my life, I had stood fully in my truth before my family. I hadn't minimized myself to make them comfortable. I hadn't hidden my light to avoid outshining Thomas. I hadn't pretended to be less to make them feel more. I called Alex, who answered immediately. How bad, she asked without preamble. Worse than I imagined I managed, but also better in a strange way. I'm at Reverie Cafe. Come now, I'll order your usual. 20 minutes later, I walked into the small cafe that had become our unofficial meeting place over the years. Alex had claimed our regular corner booth and pushed a large latte toward me as I sat down. Her expression was a mixture of concern and protectiveness. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. The arranged seating, the formal list of grievances, the separation contract, the swift change in attitude once they'd seen my bank balance. With each detail, Alex's expression grew darker. Those manipulative gaslighting, she began, then took a deep breath. Sorry, not helpful. How are you feeling? Like I've lost something. I never really had, I admitted. Like I've been mourning a family that existed only in my imagination. Alex reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You know what the really messed up part is? They had this whole plan to disown you for being a failure, but they never even bothered to find out if you actually were one. I gave a watery laugh. The irony isn't lost on me. We talked for hours processing what had happened and what it meant moving forward. Alex, who had long ago shared her own complicated family history with me, understood in a way few others could. When we finally left the cafe, it was dark outside, but I felt lighter than I'd felt in years. The pain wasn't gone. There would be more tears in the days to come. I knew, but I had named it, faced it, and in doing so, begun to release its hold on me. The next morning, I signed the acquisition papers. It wasn't an emotional decision anymore, just a business one. A good one. The beginning of a new chapter. We gathered the team together to announce the news, and their excitement and pride filled me with a sense of belonging I'd never felt with my biological family. These people had chosen to join my journey, to believe in my vision, to contribute their talents to something we were building together. That I realized was what family could and should be, a group of people who support each other's growth, rather than trying to contain it. The aftermath of the confrontation played out exactly as I might have expected had I been thinking clearly. My phone was flooded with messages and calls from family members, each with their own agenda. My father left 3 voicemails, each more businesslike than the last. The first expressed disappointment in my attitude. The second suggested a professional meeting to discuss collaboration opportunities. The third proposed a specific investment amount and ownership stake in my company, as if the previous day's confrontation had been a mere negotiating tactic. My mother took a different approach, sending texts that swung wildly between guilt trips and attempts at reconciliation. We only wanted what was best for you, one read. Another said, how could you embarrass us like that in front of Dr. Peterson? And then minutes later, I've always been your biggest supporter, even when your father doubted. Thomas predictably went straight to anger. His single text message was both accusatory and revealing. You deliberately misled this family for years. Dad is devastated. This isn't about your cute little business. This is about loyalty and respect, values you clearly never learned. Amanda surprised me with a lengthy email that felt more honest than any communication we'd had in years. I had no idea, Serena, about any of it. Not about the intervention until the day before I tried to warn you, and certainly not about your business. I'm in awe of what you've accomplished, and I'm deeply ashamed of how our family treated you. I understand if you need space from all of us, but I hope someday we might have a chance to know each other as adults outside of the family dynamic. I love you, and I'm proud of you, even if I never knew how to say it before. And James, my youngest brother, sent a simple text that made me smile through tears. Always knew you were the badass in the family. When you're ready, I'd love to hear about your company. No strings, no Parker bullshit, just your proud brother. I responded to none of them immediately. Instead, I took the time and space I needed to process my feelings and decide what boundaries I wanted to establish moving forward. This wasn't a decision to make in the heat of emotion. In the weeks that followed, I made deliberate choices about my life. I bought the dream house I'd been secretly browsing online for months, a modern light-filled space overlooking the city as different from my parents' traditional colonial as could be imagined. I moved forward with the business expansion now with the resources of our new parent company behind us. I took genuine pleasure in sending out the bonus checks to every member of our team, knowing that each person was receiving recognition for their contributions to our shared success. And I created a support group for entrepreneurs from difficult family backgrounds, a place where others could share their experiences and find the understanding I'd so often longed for. It was healing to discover I wasn't alone, that many successful people had faced similar struggles with families who couldn't see or accept them. Most importantly, I began the process of redefining family for myself. Family wasn't just blood and shared history, it was chosen connections. Mutual respect, joy in each other's growth rather than resentment, support without control, love without conditions. I decided to maintain minimal, carefully boundaried contact with my parents and Thomas. I wasn't ready to cut ties completely. Something in me still hoped for eventual understanding, even if never approval, but I would no longer make myself vulnerable to their manipulation. With Amanda, I began a cautious rebuilding. We met for coffee without our parents' knowledge, and for the first time, I felt I was seeing the real Amanda emerging from behind the perfect daughter facade she'd maintained for so long. James and I grew closer than we'd ever been. To my delight, he asked if there might be a place for him at my company once he finished his degree. Not because we were family, but because he genuinely admired what we were building. I told him to send his resume like anyone else would, and was impressed when he did exactly that. As the dust settled and the initial pain began to dull, I found myself creating new traditions to replace the old ones I'd lost. Friendsgiving instead of Thanksgiving at my parents' house. A winter solstice gathering rather than the formal Christmas Eve dinner. Celebrations that honored authenticity rather than appearance, connection rather than obligation. And through it all, I began to understand that walking away from toxic expectations, standing firm in my own truth and choosing my own path, wasn't selfishness as my family had claimed. It was the most profound act of self-love I could offer myself. A gift that in time would allow me to give more genuinely to others than I ever could have, from a place of compliance and diminishment. 6 months after that fateful intervention, I stood in the bright open kitchen of my new home, putting the finishing touches on dinner for the people who had become my chosen family. Through the wide windows, I could see the city lights beginning to sparkle as dusk settled a view that still took my breath away sometimes. The journey from that devastating day to this peaceful evening hadn't been an easy one. The first few weeks had been particularly difficult, filled with waves of grief that would hit unexpectedly a song on the radio that reminded me of childhood, a stranger with my mother's perfume passing on the street, old photos I found while unpacking. Each trigger would bring a fresh wave of pain, the morning of a family relationship that had never been what I needed it to be. I found a therapist, one nothing like Dr. Peterson, who specialized in family trauma and boundary setting. With her guidance, I began to untangle the complex web of emotions surrounding my family. The longing for approval that had shaped so many of my choices. The habit of making myself smaller to avoid conflict. The belief that love had to be earned through compliance. Doing this work wasn't about demonizing my family. It was about seeing them clearly, perhaps for the first time. My parents were products of their own upbringing, carrying forward the values and expectations that had been placed on them. Thomas had been shaped by the golden child role he'd been assigned from birth. Amanda and James had developed their own coping mechanisms within the rigid family system. Understanding this didn't excuse their behavior, but it helped me release some of the anger that had been weighing me down. With distance and perspective, I could see how my own behaviors had been shaped by our family dynamic, how I had both rebelled against and sought approval from my parents simultaneously, how I'd hidden my success partly out of self-protection, but also as a form of passive resistance, how I'd denied myself full celebration of my achievements, because deep down, I still measured my worth by standards that were never truly mine. Breaking these patterns wasn't an overnight process. It was daily work, conscious choices, gentle self-correction when I slipped back into old ways of thinking. But with each small victory, each moment of choosing authenticity over approval-seeking, I built a stronger foundation for the life I wanted. My relationship with my parents evolved into something minimal but manageable. After 2 months of no contact, I agreed to a lunch meeting at a neutral location. I set clear boundaries about what I was willing to discuss and what was off limits. I maintained financial and emotional independence, declining their attempts to now invest in my success or take credit for my achievements. Thomas and I acknowledged that we might never be close. Too many years of competition and resentment stood between us. But we could be civil at the occasional family gathering, exchanging pleasantries, before gravitating to separate conversations. Amanda surprised everyone, perhaps even herself, by beginning her own journey toward independence. Inspired partly by my stand and partly by her own growing dissatisfaction, she had started questioning the path laid out for her. We began having regular sister dinners, getting to know each other as adults, rather than as the roles we'd been assigned as children. James had moved to Boston and was now working as a junior developer at my company, earning his position through merit rather than nepotism. His fresh perspective and natural creativity were already proving valuable to the team. More importantly, we were building the sibling relationship we'd never been allowed to have growing up. As I arranged the final place setting for tonight's dinner, the doorbell rang. Alex arrived first, bringing wine, and her girlfriend Mia, whom I'd been delighted to welcome into our circle. James followed shortly after, still adjusting to professional dress, but beaming with stories about his first major coding breakthrough. Diane came with her husband Roberto, both carrying dishes to contribute to the meal. Amanda had texted that she'd be a few minutes late. She'd had to make an excuse to our parents about where she was going tonight, still not ready to be fully honest with them about our reconciliation. This gathering had become a monthly tradition, a chosen family dinner that held none of the tension or performance of my childhood Sunday meals. Here, there were no expectations except authenticity, no judgment, only support, no competition, only celebration of each other's journeys. As we settled around the table sharing food and stories and laughter, I looked at these people who had chosen to be in my life and whom I had chosen in return. People who saw me clearly and valued me for exactly who I was. People who encouraged growth rather than compliance. People who understood that love shouldn't come with conditions or expectations attached. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over. There were still days when the old pain resurfaced. Still moments when I caught myself seeking approval in unhealthy ways. Still occasions when family events brought back the tension and anxiety I'd worked so hard to release. But I had learned that family isn't defined by blood or obligation. It's created through choice, maintained through mutual respect, and nourished by genuine care for each other's well-being. It's found in the people who stand by you at your lowest moments and celebrate with you at your highest. It's built in small moments of connection and vulnerability, shared and accepted in growth, supported and encouraged. As Amanda finally arrived, slipping into the empty chair with an apologetic smile, I raised my glass in a toast. To family, I said, the one we choose and create for ourselves. The one that loves us for who we are, not who they want us to be. Glasses clinked, smiles were exchanged, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that I had found my way home. Have you ever had to choose between the family you were born into and the one you created for yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to create your own definition of family. Remember, the relationships that truly matter are the ones that honor who you are, not who someone else thinks you should be. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the ones that ultimately set us free.